They called him a demon wrapped in horseflesh. 3 men had already been left maimed by the Duke's prized record-breaking stallion, a beast destined for the executioner's bullet. But the wealthiest man in Suffolk never expected his salvation to come from the quiet, dirt-smudged stable girl hiding in the shadows. The year was 1912, and the chill of early autumn clung to the sprawling, fog-drenched grounds of the Ashbourne estate, just a few miles south of Newmarket. Alistair Covington, the formidable Duke of Ashbourne, stood by the heavy oak fencing of the main paddock, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He was a man accustomed to total obedience. His wealth, built on vast textile mills in the north and shrewd investments in the booming railways, insulated him from the word no. Yet the magnificent creature tearing up the turf before him cared nothing for aristocratic titles or bank accounts. His name was Balthazar. Balthazar was a true titan of a horse, standing 17 hands high, with a coat the colour of poured midnight and eyes that rolled with white, hot fury. Alistair had purchased the stallion at the elite Tattersall's auction house in London for a staggering 3,000 guineas, a record-breaking sum that had made headlines in the Times. The horse carried the bloodline of the legendary Eclipse and had been privately bred by the estate of the late Lord George Bentinck. Balthazar was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Ashbourne stables, a guaranteed champion for the upcoming St. Leger Stakes, and a living testament to the Duke's unrivaled prestige. Instead, Balthazar had become a walking nightmare. In the 3 months since his arrival at Ashbourne, the stallion had broken the ribs of an experienced farrier, nearly crushed the skull of a renowned Irish horsebreaker named Declan O'Connor, and sent 2 seasoned grooms to the hospital with shattered collarbones. He allowed no one in his stall. He accepted no bit, no saddle, and certainly no rider. "He is mad, Your Grace," spat Gideon Croft, the estate's imposing stablemaster. Croft was a thick-necked, brutal man who believed that any animal could be broken if enough force was applied. He stood beside the Duke, a heavy leather bullwhip coiled aggressively in his thick hands. "He has bad blood. Bentinck's stableman warned us he was wild, but this isn't wildness. It's pure, untamed malice. We should put a bullet between his eyes before he kills someone." Alistair's grey eyes remained fixed on the horse. Balthazar was currently rearing, his massive hooves striking the air as he let out a shrill, terrifying squeal that echoed across the quiet valley. The Duke felt a profound sense of failure, an emotion he fiercely despised. "I do not shoot 3,000 guineas, Croft," Alistair said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Nor do I surrender to an animal. You have 1 month until the St. Leger. If he is not under saddle and manageable by the time the racing syndicate arrives for the autumn inspection, I will see him destroyed. But until then, you will do your job." "As you wish, Your Grace," Croft muttered, though his eyes betrayed his violent intentions toward the horse. Standing entirely unnoticed in the shadows of the tack room was Rosalind Hayes. Rosalind was 22, with hands calloused from years of hard labour and a quiet, stoic demeanour that made her virtually invisible to the high-ranking men of the estate. She was officially employed as a lowly assistant groom, her days spent mucking stalls, polishing silver buckles, and carrying heavy buckets of oats. But Rosalind possessed an inheritance far more valuable than gold, a profound, almost supernatural understanding of equine nature. Her father, Thomas Hayes, had once been a master cavalryman during the Crimean War, surviving the brutal charge of the Light Brigade. He had taught Rosalind that a horse's behaviour was never born of pure malice, but of memory. However, after returning to England, Thomas had fallen prey to the underground gambling dens of Soho, eventually losing his life and leaving Rosalind entirely orphaned and heavily in debt. She had taken the job at Ashbourne simply to survive, keeping her head down and her mouth strictly shut. But for the past 3 months, Rosalind had been secretly studying Balthazar. She watched when Croft wasn't looking. She noticed what the arrogant stablemaster and the prideful Duke had entirely missed. When Croft marched toward the paddock swinging his whip, Balthazar didn't attack out of aggression. He struck out of blind, suffocating terror. Rosalind had meticulously observed the way the stallion favored his left side, tossing his head violently whenever someone approached from the right. She noticed the faint, jagged scar hidden beneath the thick mane on his neck. A burn mark. Through quiet inquiries with the delivery boys coming from London, Rosalind had uncovered a terrifying truth. Before being sent to Tattersall's, Balthazar had been trapped in a horrific barn fire at the Earl of Derby's secondary estate. The trauma of the flames, the smoke, and the agonizing heat had scarred the animal's mind. To make matters worse, Croft constantly smoked a pungent, dark tobacco from a briarwood pipe. To Balthazar, the smell of the smoke and the crack of the whip signaled a return to the fire. The horse wasn't a demon. He was a prisoner of his own traumatic memories, fighting for his life against men who smelled like his greatest nightmare. That evening, as the heavy Suffolk fog rolled in and blanketed the estate, Rosalind made a decision that bordered on treason. If she did nothing, the magnificent creature would be slaughtered. She knew the penalty for a stable hand interfering with a duke's prized stallion was immediate dismissal without pay, or worse, a charge of criminal sabotage. But as she listened to the stallion kicking frantically against the heavy oak door of his isolation stall, her conscience demanded action. The estate was cloaked in absolute silence when Rosalind slipped out of the servants' quarters. The clock in the manor tower tolled midnight. She wore her simple woolen trousers and a rough canvas jacket, carrying nothing but a small leather pouch filled with peppermints, a soft bristle brush, and a simple, unjointed, sweet-iron snaffle bit, a gentle piece of tack she had smuggled out of the discarded bin. She moved like a ghost through the sprawling stone corridors of the main stable block. When she reached the heavy iron-reinforced door of Balthazar's isolation stall, she didn't throw the latch open aggressively. Instead, she sat down on the cold cobblestones outside his stall. Inside, the massive horse snorted, his heavy hooves pacing restlessly. He smelled her approach. Rosalind began to hum. It was a low, melodic tune, an old soldier's lullaby her father used to sing in the dark to calm his war horses before a cannon barrage. She kept her voice steady, sending a vibration of calm through the thick wooden planks. She sat there for over an hour, letting her scent, hay, lavender soap, and clean leather replace the lingering stench of Croft's tobacco. Gradually, the frantic pacing inside the stall ceased. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Rosalind stood up and unlatched the heavy iron bolt. She did not open the door fully. She only cracked it a few inches. She didn't look Balthazar in the eye. To a terrified horse, a direct stare was a predator's challenge. Instead, she kept her gaze lowered, her breathing slow and exaggerated. She stepped into the darkness of the stall. The stallion stood in the far corner, a towering silhouette of muscle and tension, his ears pinned flat against his skull. He let out a low, warning rumble. "I know, Balthazar," Rosalind whispered, her voice like velvet. "I know they hurt you. I know you remember the heat." She didn't walk toward him. She stood near the door, holding out her open palm, an unwrapped peppermint resting on her skin. She waited. Her muscles ached with the tension, her heart hammering against her ribs. If he lunged, she would be crushed against the stone wall in seconds. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, curiosity overrode the terror. Balthazar took a tentative step forward, then another. The massive beast lowered his massive head, his soft muzzle brushing against Rosalind's calloused hand. He took the peppermint gently. Rosalind didn't try to touch his face or throw a halter over him. She simply exhaled, allowing her shoulders to drop, showing him she carried no weapon, no whip, and no demands. She reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out the soft bristle brush. Moving strictly on his left side, avoiding his blind spot, she began to gently brush his shoulder in long, rhythmic strokes. The stallion trembled violently at first, but as the steady, predictable motion continued, a profound sigh escaped Balthazar's lungs. The demon of Ashbourne lowered his head, his eyes softening as he leaned into her touch. Unbeknownst to Rosalind, she was not alone. Alistair Covington suffered from chronic insomnia. The crushing weight of managing an empire spanning 3 continents often drove him to walk his estate in the dead of night. Drawn by the faint sound of humming, the Duke had entered the stable block minutes earlier. Now, standing in the shadows of the corridor, Alistair watched in absolute, paralyzed astonishment. He saw the fearsome, man-killing Balthazar, a horse that required 3 men just to feed, standing docilely in the center of the stall, and beneath the beast's massive head was a tiny, unremarkable stable girl, running a brush down the horse's neck as if he were a gentle pony. The moonlight filtering through the high barn windows caught the profile of her face. She looked serene, fearless, and utterly in control. Alistair's breath hitched. He had spent his entire life surrounded by men of power, wealthy aristocrats, and loud, demanding figures. Yet, in this quiet, dirty stall, he was witnessing a profound, silent mastery that commanded his total awe. Who was this girl? Before Alistair could step forward and reveal himself, a harsh, grating voice shattered the silence. "What in God's name are you doing?" It was Gideon Croft. The stablemaster had been drinking heavily in the village pub and had returned late, stumbling through the barn. He held a heavy lantern in one hand, its sudden, violent flare of light casting terrifying, dancing shadows against the walls of the barn. Worse, the unmistakable pungent smell of his cheap pipe tobacco immediately flooded the narrow corridor. The change in Balthazar was instantaneous and catastrophic. The smell of the smoke and the sudden burst of light triggered the stallion's worst nightmares. Balthazar shrieked, a sound of pure panic. The horse reared up, his massive front hooves striking the wooden rafters of the stall. "Get away from him, you stupid girl!" Croft roared, enraged that a lowly female assistant was in the prize stall. Croft recklessly swung the lantern forward, stepping into the doorway and completely blocking Rosalind's only exit. "No, Mr. Croft, stop!" Rosalind cried out, waving her hands. "The light! Put out the light!" But Croft, fueled by alcohol and bruised ego, reached for the heavy leather whip coiled at his belt. "I'll teach this beast a final lesson, and I'll have you thrown in the county jail for trespassing," he snarled, cracking the whip against the stone floor. The sharp crack sealed Rosalind's fate. Balthazar, completely consumed by the flashback of the burning barn, plunged forward in a blind panic. Rosalind was trapped in the narrow space between the thrashing 17-hand stallion and the stone wall. She threw her arms over her head, bracing for the bone-crushing impact of 1,000 pounds of terrified muscle, knowing absolutely that she was about to die. From the shadows, Alistair sprinted forward, his heart dropping into his stomach, screaming her name. The heavy glass of the lantern shattered against the stone wall, but it was not Croft who had thrown it. Alistair Covington had moved with a speed born of pure, unadulterated terror. He slammed his shoulder into the burly stablemaster, sending Croft crashing into the wooden feed bins. Snatching the broken, flaring lantern from the ground, the Duke hurled it directly into the massive iron water trough outside the stall. It hissed violently and extinguished, plunging the corridor back into the cool, forgiving silver of moonlight. Inside the stall, Balthazar's front hooves crashed down mere inches from Rosalind's trembling body. The stallion's chest heaved, his eyes rolling wildly in the sudden dimness, but the blinding light and the sharp crack of the whip had vanished. "Rosalind, stay perfectly still," Alistair commanded, his voice tearing through the breathless silence of the barn. He did not know how he knew her name, only that he had seen it on a meagre payroll ledger weeks ago, and it had somehow embedded itself in his memory. Rosalind didn't move a muscle. She kept her hands open and lowered, pressing her back flush against the rough stone. She began to hum again, a shaky, terrified iteration of her father's lullaby. The melody wavered in the damp air, but it reached the stallion's twitching ears. Balthazar snorted, the terrifying rumble of his panic slowly subsiding into heavy, rhythmic breathing. He lowered his massive head, nudging Rosalind's shoulder, as if checking to see if she had survived the phantom flames. Alistair let out a breath he felt he had been holding for an eternity. He turned his steely grey eyes upon Gideon Croft, who was groaning and struggling to his feet amidst spilled oats. "Your Grace," Croft stammered, wiping blood from his split lip. "That girl? She broke protocol. She let the beast loose. I was only trying to—" "You were trying to murder my horse and my employee," Alistair cut him off, his voice dropping to a register so cold it froze the air between them. "I saw everything, Croft. I saw her tame the animal you claimed was mad, and I saw you ignite his terror with your sheer incompetence. He is a devil!" Croft spat, his pride wounded beyond repair. "No man can ride him." "Perhaps no man can," Alistair replied smoothly. "You are dismissed, Croft. If you are not off my estate by dawn, I will have the magistrate charge you with attempted destruction of my property. Leave!" Croft sneered, his eyes darting venomously toward the stall where Rosalind stood, before he turned and limped away into the fog. Alistair slowly approached the open stall door. He stopped at the threshold, acutely aware of the massive animal watching him. "Miss Hayes," he said softly, "are you unharmed?" Rosalind stepped out of the shadows, her hand resting gently on Balthazar's neck. The contrast between the towering, midnight black stallion and the slight, dirt-smudged woman was staggering. "I am unharmed, Your Grace," she murmured, her gaze firmly fixed on the cobblestones. "I apologize for the trespass. I will gather my things." "You will do no such thing," Alistair said. He stepped closer, removing his heavy wool coat and offering it to her to ward off the midnight chill. "You're going to explain to me exactly how you accomplished in 1 hour what a team of seasoned professionals could not do in 3 months." Under the pale moonlight, Rosalind explained everything. She spoke of her father's cavalry days, the unwritten language of equine trauma, Balthazar's hidden burn scars, and the paralyzing terror triggered by Croft's tobacco smoke and aggressive right-sided approaches. As she spoke, Alistair realized he was not just listening to a stable girl, he was listening to a prodigy. And as she finally lifted her chin to meet his gaze, he was struck by the fierce, intelligent fire in her hazel eyes. "From this moment forward, Miss Hayes, you are the head trainer of Ashbourne," Alistair declared. Rosalind gasped, taking a step back. "Your Grace, that is impossible. The racing syndicate will never allow a woman to hold such a title. The Jockey Club will laugh you out of Newmarket." "Let them laugh," Alistair said, a dangerous, thrilling smile touching the corner of his mouth. "I bow to no syndicate. You have 1 month until the St. Leger Stakes, Rosalind. Whatever you need, whoever you need to hire or fire, the authority is yours." The following weeks sent shockwaves through the aristocratic racing world. Whispers echoed through the elite clubs of London. The Duke of Ashbourne has lost his mind. He has handed his 3,000 guinea prize to a peasant girl. But behind the high stone walls of the estate, a miracle was unfolding. Rosalind threw away the heavy silver-shanked bits, the spurs and the whips. She trained Balthazar using only a simple snaffle, body weight, and mutual respect. She conditioned him on the sprawling green hills of Suffolk at dawn, riding him bareback with a joy that took Alistair's breath away. Alistair found himself drawn to the stables at every hour. He abandoned his ledgers and railway meetings to watch her work. They began taking morning rides together. The Duke on his steady grey gelding, Rosalind on the magnificent, thundering Balthazar. Away from the suffocating rules of Victorian high society, they talked. Alistair confessed the crushing loneliness of his title, the weight of a legacy he never asked for. Rosalind spoke of her father's gambling debts and the heartbreak of losing her family. A profound, undeniable romance bloomed between them, rooted in mutual respect and shared defiance. One evening, under the canopy of a weeping willow near the estate's lake, Alistair reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from Rosalind's cheek. "They say I am a fool for trusting you," he whispered, his thumb tracing her jawline. "And what do you say?" Rosalind asked, her heart hammering not with fear, but with a wild, terrifying hope. "I say you are the only real thing in a world made entirely of ghosts," he replied, leaning in to capture her lips in a kiss that tasted of rain and revolution. But their sanctuary was about to be violently breached. The world of elite horse racing was cutthroat, and Gideon Croft had not simply disappeared. He had found a new patron, Lord Arthur Harrington, Alistair's fiercest rival, a man who had placed a fortune in illegal wagers against Balthazar, running in the St. Leger. Croft wanted revenge, and Harrington wanted a guaranteed payout. Together, they concocted a plan to ensure the Beast of Ashbourne would never reach the starting line. September arrived, bringing with it the crisp, electric air of the St. Leger Stakes at Doncaster. The grandstands were a sea of silk top hats, parasols, and aristocratic tension. Over 60,000 spectators had gathered, rumours swirling that Ashbourne's legendary, volatile stallion was finally making his debut. In the high-security saddling enclosures beneath the grandstands, the atmosphere was suffocating. Rosalind stood by Balthazar, brushing his midnight coat until it gleamed like polished obsidian. The horse was a coiled spring of power, but his ears were forward, his eyes calm as he listened to Rosalind's steady humming. The appointed jockey, a wiry veteran named Tommy Fletcher, stood nearby, holding the racing saddle with shaking hands. "He's a monster, Miss Hayes. Are you sure he won't try to kill me?" "He will carry you like a king, Tommy, as long as you do not strike him," Rosalind reassured him, adjusting the simple leather bridle. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted at the entrance to the enclosure. A group of wealthy patrons, led by Lord Arthur Harrington, pushed past the security guards, demanding to inspect the favourite. Alistair stepped forward, his tall frame blocking their path. "This is a restricted area, Harrington," Alistair said coldly. "Just checking to see if your peasant girl has truly tamed the devil, Covington," Harrington sneered, waving a dismissive hand. Amidst the distraction of the arguing nobles, Rosalind noticed a shadow slip past the hay bales at the rear of Balthazar's stall. It was a man wearing a flat cap pulled low over his eyes. In his hand, he held a metal canister. Rosalind's blood ran cold. The pungent, unmistakable stench of cheap briarwood tobacco hit her nose. Croft. She didn't scream. She knew a sudden noise would startle Balthazar. Instead, she vaulted over the half-door of the stall, just as Croft struck a sulphur match, preparing to ignite a canister of heavy, black smoke directly at the stallion's hooves, a calculated move to trigger Balthazar's traumatic flashbacks of the fire right before the race. "No!" Rosalind tackled the burly man with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cub. The match fell to the damp straw, instantly sputtering out. Croft snarled, striking Rosalind across the face with the back of his hand. She stumbled, falling hard against the wooden planks. Croft raised his boot to kick her, but before he could connect, a force like a freight train slammed into him. Alistair had heard the scuffle. He drove his fist into Croft's jaw with a sickening crunch, sending the former stablemaster unconscious to the floor. Track police flooded the stall seconds later, dragging the limp saboteur away. But the damage to the atmosphere was done. The scuffle, the shouts, and the lingering smell of Croft's tobacco had reached Balthazar. The stallion was practically vibrating with panic, his eyes wide and rolling, sweat lathering his neck. He reared, striking the stall door. Tommy Fletcher dropped the saddle and backed away, his face pale. "I can't ride him, Your Grace. He's gone mad again. He'll trample me in the starting gates. I'm sorry." The jockey turned and fled into the crowd. The warning bell rang out across Doncaster. 5 minutes to post time. "We have to withdraw him," Alistair said, his voice thick with defeat as he knelt beside Rosalind, checking her bruised cheek. "It's over, Rosalind. He's too panicked." "No!" Rosalind grabbed Alistair's lapels, her eyes blazing. "If you withdraw him now, he learns that fear wins. He learns that the smoke and the shouting dictate his life. He has to run, Alistair. He has to run now." "I don't have a jockey!" Alistair shouted over the roar of the crowd. Rosalind looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, you do." Alistair stared at her, stunned. Aristocrats did not ride in the St. Leger. It was unheard of, a shocking breach of protocol. But as he looked at the terrified horse, and then at the brilliant, courageous woman who had risked her life for them both, the rules of society seemed utterly meaningless. Without a word, Alistair stripped off his formal morning coat and his silk top hat, tossing them into the dirt. He grabbed the racing saddle. "Help me tack him," Alistair commanded. Working in synchronized, desperate harmony, they saddled the thrashing beast. Rosalind took Balthazar's reins, stepping directly in front of the massive horse. She ignored the noise of the crowd, the shouts of the officials, and the ringing bells. She locked eyes with the stallion and began to hum, loud and clear. Slowly, Balthazar lowered his head. Rosalind guided him out of the enclosure, walking backwards, keeping his focus entirely on her until they reached the edge of the turf. Alistair swung himself into the saddle. "I will see you at the finish line, Your Grace," Rosalind whispered, stepping back. "Ride with me in spirit, Rosalind," Alistair replied, gathering the reins. As Alistair guided Balthazar to the starting tape, the grandstands erupted in a mixture of gasps, cheers, and outraged shouts. The Duke of Ashbourne was riding his own horse. Lord Harrington watched in pale, furious disbelief. The flag dropped. Balthazar did not bolt in panic. He exploded forward with the pure, unadulterated joy of a creature finally set free. He was a black missile cutting through the autumn air. The other horses were magnificent athletes, but Balthazar was a force of nature. Alistair didn't use a whip. He simply leaned over the stallion's neck, whispering his name, feeling the immense, rhythmic power beneath him. They passed the halfway mark in a blur. By the final furlong, it wasn't even a race. Balthazar pulled away from the pack, his hooves thundering against the turf, crossing the finish line a full 10 lengths ahead of the closest competitor. He had smashed the course record. The crowd stood in stunned, absolute silence for a fraction of a second before erupting into a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of Doncaster. Alistair guided the panting, triumphant stallion into the winner's enclosure. Dignitaries, royals, and syndicate members rushed forward to congratulate the Duke, offering silver cups and wreaths of flowers. Alistair ignored them all. He slid off Balthazar's back, handing the reins to a stunned track official. He pushed through the crowd of lords and ladies, his eyes scanning the sea of faces, until he found her. Rosalind stood at the edge of the enclosure, her simple canvas jacket dusted with dirt, a fading bruise on her cheek, weeping tears of pure joy. In front of 60,000 people, the wealthiest duke in England walked up to the lowly stable girl. He didn't offer his hand. He took her face in both of his hands and kissed her, a deep, passionate claiming that sent a collective gasp rippling through the aristocracy. "We won," Alistair whispered against her lips. "He won," Rosalind corrected. smiling through her tears as Balthazar let out a triumphant whinny behind them. The world of high society would never be the same. The Duke of Ashbourne married his head trainer the following spring in a quiet ceremony attended by a few loyal friends and one very large midnight black stallion who stood patiently at the church gates. Balthazar went on to sire a dynasty of champions, but he never wore a harsh bit, and he never felt the sting of a whip again. He answered only to love, and to the quiet woman who had walked into the darkness to save him. If you were captivated by this thrilling tale of defiance, courage, and unexpected romance, hit that like button right now. Share this story with fellow history and horse lovers who believe in the power of gentleness over force, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking, dramatic stories from the past. Your support keeps these forgotten legends alive.